Let's get on to the transfer, which has got plenty of people talking. Eze was Spurs, Carve, it's now Arsenal. A remarkable turnaround. Please just explain how on earth this has happened.
Well, look, today is a great day to be an Arsenal supporter. I mean, they have pulled off a real transfer coup because Eberechi Eze was on his way to Tottenham, but at the last minute, Arsenal decided to match Spurs' offer. Also, it's very important that the player himself, growing up, he was an Arsenal supporter. He's always wanted to play for Arsenal. So his wish was very important in this as well. But Arsenal moved at the 11th hour, matched Spurs' bid, 60 million plus around 7.5 million in add-ons. Remember, he had a release clause which expired on Friday, which was worth up to £68 million. But now he's on his way to Arsenal. I'm afraid it's bad news for Spurs fans. Spurs fans are very, very angry about the way this has turned out. But I do have some sympathy for them because they tried to sign him. But at the end of the day, the player has set his heart on moving to Arsenal.
Yeah, we'll get the Spurs perspective on Eze in just a second. But like Harvey mentioned there, Andy, obviously Eze being a boyhood Arsenal fan, he was in the Arsenal Academy. Do you think Arsenal were always in for him? Was this always going to happen?
Well, I guess it seems like Spurs might have been used a little bit in this. I think that always feels like that in this case. I mean, I can understand why the fans are upset, but what really more could they have done? You know, they
get it done sooner.
Well, they agreed a fee, and if the player wants to drag his feet and see what else is happening, look, we're sitting here talking, and there's 10 days left. So you know, there's no massive rush for it to happen. I don't think the clock was working in Spurs' favour as well. Look, if he really wants to go back and lance that boil, you know, no one can stop him, and nothing that Tottenham could say really could change that, I suppose. But obviously, with what happened with Morgan Gibbs-White as well, it's incredibly frustrating. And in both cases, I don't know what Spurs could have done that differently.
Do you not think they could have got it done? Because they've known since James Maddison's injury, which was before the season even started, that they needed a number 10 with Kulusevski out as well. Why has it taken them this long to get a number 10 over the line?
Well, I guess it's a lot to piece together.
Yeah.
I guess the fact is that Eze is he's not one in a million, but he's one in several 100,000, I think it's fair to say. Because, you know, if you're looking for someone who's played a couple of hundred Premier League games, who's got that experience, who's an England player, who you know can do it in the Premier League, I mean, it's really difficult to go out and get someone else like that. I just wonder what Spurs' options are now, really.
Yeah.
If you're looking at Europe, because there aren't a whole lot of number 10s out there, I wonder if it's worth a little go for Brahim Diaz. Because the latest news from Madrid is it looks like Rodrigo is not going anywhere. Xabi Alonso would like to keep him, and the offers aren't really out there at the moment. Now, Brahim Diaz is someone who's at Manchester City. He's won leagues in 3 different countries. He's a match changer in all the big matches that he plays. 26 and can't get in the Real Madrid 11.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that looks like a bit of Spurs.
Yeah. I wonder if they'll miss out on him as well. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe not. They won't. No. They maybe not. They won't miss out on him. Let's really sort of focus on Arsenal then, Carve. And we sort of always sit here and talk about strength and depth and Mikel Arteta's squad perhaps not being the strongest in terms of the full set. But Eze is exactly the sort of player, when you look at that Arsenal squad, that they need, whether that's on the left, whether that's a number 10 sort of, you know, we could play him if Martin Odegaard comes off. He just feels like it's a perfect fit.
Look, they've been interested in signing him all summer, and Arsenal fans were sort of crying out for Arsenal to make a move for him. But when you looked at how much business Arsenal had already done this summer, you could make a case for the fact that, look, they need to sell before they sign somebody else. The really interesting question for me is this move just motivated by the fact that Kai Havertz picked up this injury on Sunday at Old Trafford? Is that why they've moved at the 11th hour? Or have they been really, really smart and they have done what a lot of big clubs do now, which is not get involved in a bidding war for Eze? So what they did is they were aware of the situation regarding Eze. They always knew that ultimately he would choose Arsenal if he had a choice. So what they did is just took a back seat said, let Spurs get on with it, let them negotiate with Steve Parish, let them hammer out a deal, and once a deal is agreed, at the 11th hour, we will pick up the phone, get in touch with Crystal Palace and say, we will match what Spurs have agreed and the player wants to come to us. So they wouldn't get involved in a bidding war. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I think it's a bit of both. I think they always were interested in making a move for Eze, but obviously this injury to Kai Havertz has forced their hand a little bit.
Do you agree with that, Andy?
Yeah, I think Spurs advancing and agreeing the deal has given Arsenal the little nudge that they needed. I guess the question is, though, I don't know what you guys think. Is he the piece? And it's a bit of a cliche,
missing piece.
Is he the piece that pushes them over the top?
Do you think so?
No.
No.
I think he's really good to have, and I think he improves Arsenal, and I think he really helps them. But if you're asking me, does this make them title favourites? It's still a no for the moment, especially when, well, a certain centre forward we might mention who might be heading for the Northwest a little bit later on, that would shake up the picture again, wouldn't it?
So what does, if Eze doesn't make Arsenal title favourites, then what does make Arsenal title favourites when you look at that squad that they've got under Mikel Arteta now?
I don't know, I just need to believe. I think getting through Christmas and being top two in the back half of March, that makes me believe, really.
Do you think? What do you think, Carve? Have Spurs just handed Arsenal the Premier League trophy?
I mean, I think I'd agree with Andy. I think Liverpool are still the favourites, Man City, but I think Arsenal are right in there. I think Arsenal have got a brilliant goalkeeper, incredible defence, brilliant midfield. I think up front maybe they're not as good as some of their rivals, and they've got injury problems up front as well. For instance, the only fit striker they've got at the moment is Gyökeres. Gabriel Jesus is out again. We don't know how long Havertz is going to be out for. So there's still some Arsenal fans out there who are saying, great news, let's celebrate the fact that we've got Eze, but we want to sign another forward as well, depending on what happens, for instance, with Trossard. I
mean, Andy, do you agree with that? Do you think Arsenal might still dip into the market to try and find a Kai Havertz replacement?
Where would the money come from?
Yeah.
I think you've got to be looking at a loan, really, don't you? And I don't think we can turn our noses up at that. I think, especially when you get to the last 3 or 4 days of the transfer window, teams get in a situation where they really need someone or they really need to shift someone. And then the boundaries start moving. I think what Carve was talking about before with this whole Eze deal, I think patience is the key thing, really, in the window. I know coaches and managers always want their squad all set for pre-season training. That's just not realistic nowadays, is it? Especially when you've got the Club World Cup running into the Premier League season or the Premier League pre-season as well. So I just think it's about a bit of patience. There will be opportunities out there in the last 3 or 4 days of the window.
Let's get the Spurs perspective now, because I suppose Andy said, Carve, that Spurs almost did everything they could. Do you believe they did everything they could and maybe they should have got this over the line, or maybe they can be forgiven for what's happened?
I mean, look, this is not Football Manager. This is real life. And, you know, Spurs are down at the moment. I don't want to kick Spurs when they're down. I'm trying to see it from the perspective of the hierarchy at Spurs. I think they did everything they could to try and sell Eze. OK, I hear a lot of Spurs fans, especially on social media, saying, why didn't we just trigger the release clause? Yeah. He had this release clause. Why didn't we do it
And it's a similar amount to what Arsenal are paying.
Exactly. So why didn't we do it before Friday? Just put the money down, then he would be our player. Arsenal would have been out of the equation. We don't know. Maybe they tried to do that. And maybe the player himself dragged his feet and said, I'm not sure, even though Spurs are willing to trigger the release clause, I'm not sure I want to go to Spurs. Maybe he was keeping his options open. So I understand Spurs fans are very, very angry. They're criticising the owners again. They're criticising Daniel Levy again. But I think we should keep things in perspective. These kind of things happen the whole time in the transfer market. Spurs did their best to sign him. But ultimately, everybody knows Eze is an Arsenal fan. Yeah. His family are all Arsenal fans. He played for Arsenal until he was 13 when he was released. He's always wanted to play for them. The question is, why didn't they trigger the release clause? Who knows? Maybe the release clause had to be paid in one lump sum. Yeah. So maybe Spurs were thinking, let's wait until it's expired, then we can get better payment terms. I don't know. But I think, you know, OK, everyone's having a laugh and making fun of Spurs fans this morning, but I think we should just we should tone it down a little bit. I can understand why they're angry, but I don't think it's the absolute disaster that people are making it out to be.
Yeah, I think it's maybe perhaps that it's Arsenal that they've lost out to. I think if it was any other club, they probably wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, if I was a Spurs fan, I would be feeling terrible this morning. But look, worse things have happened in the transfer market. I remember Emmanuel Petit, you know, almost being at Spurs' training ground, then getting a mini cab to Arsenal's training ground, signing for Arsenal. Remember what happened to Willian? He was about to sign for Spurs last minute.
Thoroughly enjoyed that.
He hopped in a cab and went to sign for Chelsea as well. So I think Spurs fans have experienced this before.
I think we have to say, realistically, for the moment, take away the Eze and his family support Arsenal bit of it. If you're thinking, I want to win the Premier League this season, which are the two clubs you sign him for? I mean, that's the reality of it. And I'm not just saying that because of where Spurs finished last season, obviously. You know, you have to prove yourselves over time. Just like I feel that Arsenal aren't the definite title favourites.
And if you're a real Arsenal fan, it'd be difficult to play for Spurs. If you are like, you know, if you're a real Arsenal fan.
Does that matter? I always wonder, does that matter nowadays? Like when these players
how
grow
much
up
you love
supporting
Arsenal.
a team, but like I feel like that affiliation to a club perhaps goes when you actually start playing professionally. Yeah.
I would.
So will Eze still be an Arsenal fan? I don't know.
Maybe I'm just heartless for thinking that, but I think that, yeah.
Let's talk about, because Richarlison was reported to have been offered to Crystal Palace in this deal for Eze. Obviously,
talking of heartless,
scored 2 worldies on the weekend. Is all keeping Dominic Solanke out the side as it stands. I mean, Carve, what does this mean for Richarlison?
It's going to be an interesting atmosphere at Tottenham's training ground this morning when he turns up. You know, I wonder what kind of mood he's going to be in this morning. But I suppose he's been in football long enough to know that these kind of things happen. I think he's only got 2 years left on his contract at Tottenham. He's been linked with lots of other clubs as well, but he's just got to focus on doing what he does on the pitch. I could not see him moving to Crystal Palace as part of a deal for Eze. I don't think Richarlison, with respect to Crystal Palace, would want to go to Crystal Palace at this stage of his career. And also, I don't think Crystal Palace would have been interested in a swap deal. Swap deals have really gone out of fashion in the sort of modern age of football.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's difficult, isn't it? Because you're talking about a guy who is, you know, Brazil's starting forward when he's fit. But having said that, I think as a Tottenham fan, you might think, that would have been a bit too much to sacrifice. If you go back a month, probably no one's bothered. You know, so I think really he's just having a moment, and hopefully for him and hopefully for Spurs that moment continues. But yeah, I think sometimes you just got to say it's just the business.
Yeah, well, that's the Spurs perspective then. And what about, I suppose, Crystal Palace in all this, Carve? Because they have sold arguably their best player to Arsenal, it looks like. But I suppose the question is, why have they let Eze go?
I think because he's got 2 years left on his contract, and also because Crystal Palace need the money. I think pretty much every summer they do sell a player. Last summer they sold Michael Olise to Bayern Munich. But, you know, if I was a Crystal Palace fan, I'm thinking, what, 3 months ago we won the FA Cup, and we won the Charity Shield. Now we've been demoted from the Europa to the Conference League. Now we've lost our best player. Where is the ambition? Yeah. There was a brilliant column by Martin Samuel in the Times yesterday who said that, OK, Crystal Palace fans dislike Mr. Marinakis at Nottingham Forest, but surely they'd love to have somebody like Marinakis running their club, because there is no way that Mr. Marinakis would sell Eze. Yeah. He would say to him, I don't care if you're an Arsenal fan, I don't care if your family have got a season ticket at the Emirates, you are not going anywhere. You're a Crystal Palace player. And also, Crystal Palace are owned by some very, very rich people. I think 75% of the club is owned by 3 American billionaires. So maybe it's part of a wider conversation. Why do these clubs need to sell their players? Because Crystal Palace have very, very rich backers. Surely we want to have a league where teams can carry on investing and keep their players. We don't just want all the best players ending up at the same big clubs the whole time.
That's what we'd love, of course, from a neutral perspective. But the reality is Crystal Palace are Crystal Palace, FA Cup or not. And, players who play for them will want to play for bigger clubs. And also, I think Wilfried Zaha is kind of a precursor to this as well. You think there's someone who was one of the better players in the Premier League, who had ambitions to play Champions League, who attracted interest from, say, Dortmund, Chelsea, clubs like that. They couldn't go anywhere because he was locked in on a big contract. Now, I think Eze and Mark Gay, you look at their contractual situations, they're almost a legacy of Uncle Wilf, aren't they? They've sort of not got themselves into that sort of situation. And what that means is Palace are forced to make a choice if they don't want to lose a lot of money. And that's the choice they've made, even when the buyout clause has gone past. I suppose the difficulty is that man there, really, Oliver Glasner, someone who's a winning coach, an ambitious coach who does well wherever he is, who I'm sure bigger Premier League clubs with respect to Palace will be looking at thinking that could be a bit of us, one managerial change down the line. How do they please him? How do they keep him? I think what Palace do in the next 10 days is really important, because even losing those two, assuming that Gay goes before the end of the window, they're still one of the contenders to win the Conference League, which 100%. Of course they enter tonight. But in terms of keeping Glasner, in terms of building, which I think from that mid-table spot in the Premier League, because the top 7 or 8 is so difficult to build, it's very expensive and very difficult. They could throw 200 million at the squad and still not get in the top 8. Yeah. So I think it's a difficult position for them to be in, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is. And you mentioned Mark Gay there, Carve. What does this mean for this move? Because we all know that the next year he can go on a free, but do you see a world in which with, Europa Conference League football, potentially they've got to get through their qualifier, a world in which they let both of them go this summer? I
think it's possible. I think it depends what happens in the game tonight. If they win the game easily tonight, so that almost, they're through the playoff, it doesn't matter about the return leg next week. I can see a situation where maybe Liverpool step up their interest in Mark Gahey and make an increased bid for him in the next couple of days. And then Crystal Palace, I think, would have a decision to make. But having heard from Steve Parish, he said we cannot have a situation where a player as good as Mark Gahey leaves on a free transfer next summer. So I think they would possibly be open to selling both those players. But it's not all doom and gloom for Crystal Palace, because Eberechi Eze will be replaced. And if Mark Gahey was to leave, he would be replaced as well. They're not just going to take the money and put it in the bank. They are going to try and improve the squad overall. And that's what the manager, Oliver Glasner, is demanding.